Well, the U.S. sending 4 Afghan detainees from Guantanamo Bay back to their home country. This as President Obama tries to reduce the number of prisoners there and eventually close the detention center. But critics say many of the detainees released from Gitmo have returned to the battlefield. Let's take a look at the potential impact of the president's policy with Mark Dubowitz. He is the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mark, how are you?
Hi, Arthel.
Well, thank you. So let me walk it back, and then you go ahead and give me your details on this. And here it is. So you've got the Gitmo detainees considered low level, unanimously approved for transfer by the Gitmo Review Task Force with security risks as part of its examination. Releasing, though, coming at a time when most U.S. troops are to leave Afghanistan. Today's December 20th, less than 2 weeks. The Taliban, meanwhile, looking to regain strength and control. And so, Mark, here's the question for you. A couple of questions. What are Americans to make of all of this? And also, what will be the assessment of the president's friends and foe?
Arthel, Americans should be deeply concerned about this. Again, we are in a situation where the tide of war is not receding, despite the president's assurances. The Taliban and other radical Islamist groups are on the offensive in Afghanistan. We are cutting our troop presence. It'll be down to less than 11,000 at the beginning of the year. It'll be down to by 0 by the beginning of 2017. So the jihadists are on the march. We're on retreat. And I think our friends and allies in the region and around the world are wondering if America has the will to really confront radical Islam.
And how does that play on the president's decisions moving forward, do you think?
Well, again, the president has been pretty clear and upfront from the beginning about his belief that we have to extricate ourselves from these wars and extricate ourselves from the Middle East, and that other countries have got to step up and fight. Now, I mean, it's a good principle in theory, but the reality is there's no substitute for American leadership. There's no substitute for American power. And we've already learned a very bad and valuable lesson in Iraq when the president pulled out all American troops from Iraq, only to create a vacuum that has been filled by the Islamic State that has been now on the offensive, and the president now has to send essentially boots on the ground back in.
Yeah, and then, of course, this week, Mark, the president touting 15,000 is the number of troops deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, down from close to 180,000. How is this going to impact the fight that's still happening there against ISIS? And we'll talk about those airstrikes now. Are they enough? U.S. officials saying that they are, and keeping in mind that, as you were mentioning, that there is U.S. military personnel still there training the locals for the ground fight. So with the airstrikes and the personnel that's there, is it enough to fight ISIS?
It's too early to tell, but I think that the reality is that we can't win a war with airstrikes. We can't win a war with drones. We need intelligence. We need to know where the bad guys are. And without our guys on the ground calling in these strikes with actionable intelligence, it's going to be very, very difficult. I think we're going to be in a holding pattern both in Iraq, certainly in Syria, and in Afghanistan. And if the jihadists are winning, then they are the strong horse. They're perceived to be the strong horse, and that'll help them recruit more and more fighters for their cause.
So in the meantime, you're saying if they're recruiting the jihadists, they're recruiting more and more fighters for their cause, you're saying that America needs to have more intel on the ground. And how do you think that's going to play out, Mark?
Well, again, I mean, we're going to be depending on the Afghan security forces. We're depending on the Iraqi military. We don't have reliable partners on the ground despite years and years of training and billions of dollars invested in these militaries. The reality is the only military in the world that we can depend on is the United States military. It's the greatest fighting force in human history, and it's the only fighting force that's going to keep us safe. We learned the valuable lesson and the painful lesson on 9/11 that eventually these threats would hit American soil. And I'm deeply concerned that that may be another painful decade ahead of us.
All right, Mark Dubowitz, I have to go. Thank you very much.